Welcome to Module 4. In this chapter, we'll be talking about work and leisure. So we're going to start off by talking about jobs and nationalities and ways of talking about those jobs with different expressions. Notably, we'll be talking about the expression il or elle, est, and the difference between that and c'est and ce sont. Before we start off though, let's look at some vocabulary. Starting off with jobs and professions. Most professions in French have both a masculine and a feminine form, just like all other adjectives. And they often follow the same pattern as adjectives for agreement. If a job title ends in a consonant, like our first job title here, un avocat, or the nationality, français, we will just add an E to the end of it, une avocate, or française, to make the feminine version. So, un avocat, a lawyer, is a masculine, a guy who's a lawyer. Une avocate is a lawyer, but a woman who's a lawyer. Français, which you already know, means French to describe a masculine person, boy or a man. Française, with an E, as you already know, is the word for French to describe a woman or a girl. If the adjective or the noun ends in IEN, such as musician, un musicien, just like with the adjectives that end in IEN, we're going to add an extra N before the E. So for the masculine, we would have un musicien. For the feminine, une musicienne. Similarly with the adjective, such as Italian, italien, masculin, italienne, féminin. If a profession ends in IER, we will add an E, but we need an accent. Un infirmier, une infirmière. EUR follows the same rule that we saw before with adjectives in Module 3. Un serveur, une serveuse. Similarly, un acteur, une actrice. We saw these same patterns earlier in Module 3 with adjectives. So let's look at some examples. Un secrétaire, une secrétaire. In this case, because the word already ends in E, leave it be. We talked about this in Module 3 as well with adjectives. If it ends in E, leave it be. You don't need to add an extra E to make something feminine. We just changed the article. Un architecte, une architecte. Il est suisse, elle est suisse. Some job titles have the word or femme right in the title. And we do the same thing in English. We say a businessman or a businesswoman, un homme d'affaires or une femme d'affaires. When you use the title in French, of course, you're going to change the word or femme to reflect who it is that you're talking about. French is, I don't want to say a sexist language, but it does have sexism built into it. Even though most job opportunities are open to women as they are in the United States, the French language doesn't always reflect those changes. Some jobs which have traditionally been masculine are still masculine, even if it's a woman doing the job. For example, il est professeur, elle est professeur. The word professeur doesn't change. Il est médecin, elle est médecin. Il est cadre, elle est cadre. These are some examples of job titles that don't change whether or not the person doing the job is masculine or feminine. So for example, even if we're using an adjective, whereas normally we would make the adjective feminine to describe a woman, in this case we would not change them because the word they're describing in these sentences, professor, doctor, and executive, are all masculine, we're going to leave the adjective masculine as well. Madame Vonnier est un bon professeur. Because professor is masculine, bon is masculine, and so is our article un. Mademoiselle Dulac est un excellent médecin. Well, even though she's a woman, she's still an excellent doctor in the masculine form. Madame Vivier est un cadre compétent. So Mrs. Vivier is a competent executive. But again, because the word cadre is masculine and there is no feminine form, we're going to use the masculine article and the masculine form of the adjective competent. So let's look at some more adjectives to describe nationalities. These are some common ones that you'll see in your textbook, and there are more listed on page 113. Algérien, masculin, algérienne, féminin. And this one follows the regular rule. We double the N before adding our E. Allemand, German, or allemande, German, feminine. Anglais or anglaise. Belge, because it ends in an E, we leave it be. There is no change for the feminine form. Canadien or canadienne follows the rule like Algerian. We double the N and then add the E. Chinois, chinoise. Espagnol, espagnole. Haïtien, haïtienne. We don't really pronounce the H at the beginning of that. Mexicain, mexicaine. Russe, ends in an E, leave it be. Sénégalais, sénégalaise, and Suisse. Notice that in French, we don't actually capitalize the adjective that describes someone's nationality. In French, to say an English woman, we would capitalize the word in English, but not in French. So let's look at the difference between il and elle est and c'est. So one of these, the first one, is he is or she is. C'est literally means it is. Now don't confuse these. We can also use these in the plural, and we could say ils sont or elles sont, or we could say ce sont. Okay, they all are the same thing. It's too much to all write that out. How do you know which to use? Let's talk about it here. Let's look at these examples. Marc est très travailleur. Il est avocat. Il est canadien. In all cases, I've used the first example. Il est. Here I've used his name. Marc is, but it's the same thing. He is lawyer. He is Canadian. He is very hardworking. Notice that there's no article here. We just say he is lawyer. So what's the difference? Let's look at some feminine examples first. Mes sœurs sont intelligentes. Elles sont médecins. Elles sont canadiennes. My sisters are intelligent. They are doctors. They are Canadian. This is the exact same structure as what we just saw. The only difference is that this is also feminine and plural. My sisters are intelligent. There's no article here. We're not going to say they are unintelligent. They are doctors. No articles. They are Canadian. Let's look at this example. Here, we're not saying il est or elle est. I'm using the second expression, c'est. What's the difference? C'est un architecte. C'est une avocate. Ce sont des étudiants. C'est une Belge. Do you see the difference? Here we say, mes sœurs sont intelligentes. Elles sont médecins. Elles sont canadiennes. And here we're saying, c'est un architecte. C'est une avocate. Ce sont des étudiants. C'est une Belge. If you answered that the difference is the article, you're exactly right. With the expression c'est, we're going to, or ce sont, which is the plural form, same expression but just one is plural. We're always going to use an article, masculine, feminine, or plural. So back here when we just looked, we said they are doctors, you can see that we don't have an article in the sentence. They are Canadian. There's no article in the sentence. But in these examples, they are students. She's a lawyer. He's an architect. We have an article. So the difference is that when you're using c'est or ce sont for the plural, we're going to use an article every time. This is whether we're talking about nationalities, she's Belgian, or profession, she's a lawyer. Let's look at some other examples. Il est médecin. He's a doctor. Because I've used the first expression, I have not included an article. C'est un bon médecin. He is a good doctor. If I want to use an adjective to describe what kind of doctor he is, I need to use c'est. I need to have the article so that I can have an adjective. Ils sont suisses. They're Swiss. Okay, that's great. Ce sont des Suisses de Genève. If I want to be more specific about them, I need to have an article. I need to use the second expression so that I can modify it. So let's recap just a little bit. If I'm just talking about someone's profession or their nationality, with no modification about whether the person is a good lawyer or a bad lawyer, or a happy Canadian or a sad Canadian, then I can use the first expression, il or elle est. Il est avocat, il est canadien. No article in here. If I want to talk about them more specifically, I'm going to need to use this expression, the second one, c'est. And I'm going to need an article. C'est un architecte, c'est une avocate. So the difference is that with the first expression, il or elle est, or the plural, ils sont, elles sont, there's no article. There's also no possibility to modify it and make it more specific. With the second expression, c'est or ce sont, I need an article, and I can also make it more specific. I hope that makes sense. We've talked about a lot of things here in this lecture today. We've talked about vocabulary with professions, how to make professions masculine and feminine. We've talked about vocabulary with nationalities and how to make those masculine and feminine. We've also talked about the difference between the expressions il and elle est and c'est and ce sont. The first one takes no article, the second one takes an article and can be modified. I hope that helps. Let me know if you have questions and we'll talk more in class.